Hey everybody, this is Dana Lane, and we're going to take a look at our Central Division in the National Hockey League today. Season is quickly approaching. We have less than a month here in Vegas where we're going to have NHL hockey for the first time in the history of this city and the first time for the history of the league that they're going to be in Las Vegas. So we're all very excited about that. But let's get to the Central Division preview. Many question marks, of course, going into this season in the Central. Can Chicago rebound after getting knocked out 2 straight seasons? Can the Nashville Predators repeat? Is Pekka Rinne is he or is he not a top-notch goaltender? We're going to find that out. Can the Minnesota Wild regain their offensive consistency that failed them in the playoffs? I mean, last time that we saw them in the playoffs, they were basically out of gas against the St. Louis Blues, and they made them look pretty pedestrian for a team that was pretty potent during the regular season. So we'll see where the Minnesota Wild finish in that regard. And of course, let's not forget about the Colorado Avalanche that really this offseason they have done absolutely nothing. They paraded Duchesne around and did not get rid of him. And of course, I just don't know how that's going to equate into anything positive for the Avalanche this offseason. So let's go ahead and take a look at the division. Also, we'll give you some future odds as well. All these future odds come from Bovada. You can find Bovada at www.sports.bovada.lv/hockey. And, of course, they're rated A+ by Sportsbook Review. Okay, so let's start it off with the Chicago Blackhawks. Their odds right now are at 12-1. Not too bad, right around where you would expect them to be. And of course, many predict the demise of the Chicago Blackhawks, but I think most of that is probably wishful thinking. Let's keep in mind the amount of games that this team has played over the last 5 seasons. I mean, they still have 3 cups in the last decade. This is still an organization that you cannot take lightly. This is not the time when Joe Quenneville's team starts coming into your town that you think you're going to get a W against Chicago automatically. You got to think that they're coming into the season with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Let's not forget, we treat this team, we remember so much about what they did in the postseason last year, getting beat by the Nashville Predators. But this is a team that came in with 109 total points. And what with the amount of changes that the Blackhawks made in the offseason, it is likely, in the beginning at least, it will cause them to take some time to get acquainted with all the different pieces of their organization. But I think once they do, I think it will be game on again for the Chicago Blackhawks. And of course, Artemi Panarin's 151 points in the last 162 NHL games is leaving Chicago. That void is going to be hopefully filled by Brandon Saad, who had 24 goals and is a plus 23 last year. I think that they filled that hole very nicely. I think Saad's going to have a big year in Chicago. Many think Columbus got the best of this deal, but I think time will definitely prove that to be true. I think Saad's going to fit in pretty nicely with Taves and Richard Panik as soon as Taves gets over losing his line buddy. So that, again, it's going to take a while for this team to gel, but I think once they do, they're going to be as good or at least touching that 100 to 105 mark, which is a little bit less than their 109 last year, but it's still good enough, of course, to make the playoffs. Let's also not forget Chicago lost the services of Scott Darling. Scott Darling was 18-8-5 last year with a 2.38 goals against average, save percentage around .924, which is fantastic, but he took his talents to Carolina, and now he's going to be the #1 guy there. And now Anton Forsberg is going to be the backup in Chicago. And Forsberg was 27-17 last season with a 228 goals against average, .926 save percentage with the Cleveland Monsters. But the AHL and the NHL is obviously completely different. So we're going to see how the backup situation in Chicago goes. And of course, Forsberg has only played in 10 NHL games, so there's still a lot of question with him as well. For me, there's too much turnover ultimately to make a future play on the Chicago Blackhawks. They will make the postseason, but unfortunately for them, I think it's going to be a 3rd place finish in the Central Division. Okay, let's go on now to the Colorado Avalanche that we talked about earlier, and Colorado's at 100 to 1, which is the worst odds on the board. according to Bovada. I don't need to spend a lot of time on these guys for sure. I wish I could put it in another way other than to say they're going to be horrible again. They have the same odds as the Vegas Golden Knights, which is an expansion team. They are expected to compete with the Golden Knights. So that gives you an idea of what the odds makers think of them. It gives you an idea of what I think of them because, honestly, the way they've handled this Duchesne thing in the offseason, really since the last trade deadline, has been comical at best. And I don't know if there's another layer to this situation where, they're trying to, obviously Joe Sakic, the general manager, is trying to get rid of Duchesne, but he's asking for a ton back. I just think that a lot of these GMs around the league are not willing to give what Sakic is offering, and that's why Duchesne is still with them. More on that in a second. Last season, of course, Colorado won just 22 games. It was their worst finish since going to Denver. The goal differential was minus 122, which was not only last, it was easily last. And to give you an idea of contrast for that, the next closest team was the Arizona Coyotes at minus 63. So they were dead last in the plus-minus category. For the better part of the year, again, Joe Sakic has been trying to get rid of Matt Duchesne, trying to parade him around the league. He is a nice player. Their asking price is of a top 4 young, established defenseman and reportedly a draft pick plus a prospect perhaps. It's way too much for a guy who just managed 41 points and 18 goals last season. Duchesne would also bring, not only that, he's not going to help you out defensively. He's already going to bring his less than stellar minus 61 with him. That, is absolutely horrific, and that's over his career. So he's never been known as a two-way player, and I just don't see any GM in the league that's going to be willing to give up what Joe Sakic is asking. And before you start blaming his numbers on the teams that he plays with, remember Mikko Rantanen, who is a 20-year-old on that team, had more goals and 2 less games and a minus 25. So his numbers were much better than Joe Sakic. And to me, I think they're asking too much, and I think they're going to go into the season with Matt Duchesne. The Avalanche will slightly improve for sure, but they're going to have a hard time being better than first year franchise in Vegas. Dallas is coming in at 12-1, and I know everybody's excited about the Dallas Stars for sure. My first question would be, if I'm Lindy Ruff, my first question would be, where was all the willingness to go out and make improvements from general manager Jim Nill last season when I was behind the bench? And, of course, Ruff was alleviated of his duties as the head coach after the Stars finished 34-37 last year with 11 overtime losses, and a season that featured bad injuries, bad goaltending, horrible defense in front of the goaltending. So the question for 2017 and 2018 is, do we as bettors jump on the Dallas Stars Kool-Aid? Because we know that every single year there seems to be that team that comes to the forefront that everybody jumps on and says, oh, they made a bunch of changes and they're going to be so much better. And then obviously they either don't make the playoffs or they disappoint. Last year was Tampa. Of course, they couldn't have envisioned the Stamkos injury, or maybe they could have. But, of course, they didn't make the playoffs by the skin of their teeth. The answer for me on that is this is a decisive no on this. I simply won't back a team with a future wagering with too many new additions, and that's exactly what the Dallas Stars have, is too many new additions. I like teams to settle in for a year. I like them to gain some grit and some experience together. And of course, behind the bench, not just on the ice, Ken Hitchcock takes over. It automatically leads me to wonder, you go from Lindy Ruff to Ken Hitchcock, and are not too far apart. I don't think Lindy wears on his players as much as Ken Hitchcock does, but Ken Hitchcock certainly is going to need a buffer in that locker room, and I wonder who exactly that's going to be, because there will be a point in the season when the Stars underachieve that Hitchcock's words are going to weigh heavily on his players, and believe me when I tell you, there needs to be a buffer in that locker room to get through that period of time. All you have to do is look at Vladimir Tarasenko in St. Louis to know that his words weigh heavily on on players, and it doesn't always come across as a motivating word. And I think even though Tarasenko had good numbers under him, I just didn't think he was very happy playing for Ken Hitchcock. So we'll see what happens this year. One reason the Stars did bring Hitch back was he is a defensive coach. And if there was anything that the Dallas Stars need, is a defensive-minded or oriented head coach, and they certainly do that. That part should improve, especially with the addition of Ben Bishop. And guys, I was a big Ben Bishop guy, and I'm not really a big Ben Bishop guy now. Here's a guy that was 18-15-5 last season. Goals against average high at 2.54. Save percentage low at 9.91%. And that was, with Los Angeles as he ended his season last year with Los Angeles after being traded. I think the Stars are going to make the playoffs, but I think they're going to get in via a wild card. That division, let's not forget, we get so enamored with one team's moves in the offseason, and we just think, God, we're just going to jump on the team. But please, let's look at the other teams in that division, and please tell me, which team's going to step back? Is it going to be the Predators? Is it going to be Chicago? Is it going to be St. Louis? Is it going to be Minnesota? All of these teams that are fantastic teams, top to bottom. Maybe, in St. Louis's case, maybe lacking a little bit depth. We'll see what the scoring situation is in Minnesota. But really, which team is going to get knocked out so Dallas can get in? I think they make the playoffs, but I don't think it's as easy as people anticipate it being. Speaking of the Minnesota Wild, they come in at 18-1. And again, we question, will they come back with the same offensive firepower that allowed them to score 3.21 goals per game last season, which was only second to Pittsburgh's 3.39. Unfortunately, we remember the last thing that we just saw, and that's true in most sports. We remember how they failed to find scoring against the St. Louis Blues, and St. Louis completely shut them down in 5 games, as you remember back to last year's playoffs. That performance, again, put another cloud over Bruce Boudreau's ability to actually lead his team deep into the playoffs. So, I think you're going to get the best out of Minnesota this season. I think this will be probably the best Minnesota team that you've seen in a while. It certainly is a story of out with the old, in with the new. Jason Pominville, Marco Scandella is off to Buffalo in exchange for Marcus Foligno and Tyler Ennis. And a lot of people are down on Tyler Ennis, and rightfully so, but I think he brings an added element of speed that Minnesota needs. He only had 5 goals, 8 assists, 13 points last season, but I think he is going to bring a bit more speed to Minnesota and certainly get an opportunity to get a bunch of playing time. He has for sure been given the underachiever label, but I think a fresh start is going to help him out there. He is, let's not forget, he is the former 26th pick overall, so somebody somewhere thought enough of him to make him a number 1 draft pick, and I think he's going to find a comfortable home in Minnesota. Both Ennis and Foligno are injury-prone, of course, which makes this a dicey move for the Wild, but I believe that this move will ultimately pay off. Another key addition that maybe a lot of people aren't talking about is the addition of Matt Cullen. Not a guy that's going to put up a ton of points for you, but sound defensively, good two-way player. He will rejoin the Wild after a successful run, a Stanley Cup run with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's athletic. He's a skilled player, not afraid to go into the corners, and, of course, his experience is a welcome addition to their locker room. I think they're going to find their scoring touch again. I think they're going over the projected win total of 46.5, and I think they're going to finish in second place in the Central Division. I like Minnesota a lot, and I think this is going to be the best Minnesota Wild team that we have seen in quite a long time, which brings us to last year's Stanley Cup runner-up in the Nashville Predators, who are standing right now at 14-1. Predators didn't win the Central Division last year, but certainly we think that they're going to this season. The Predators are my favorite to return to the Stanley Cup final. It's very difficult in the West for sure to come up with a team, because you really could come up with 6 or 7 teams and make a case for them. But when you factor a guy like Ryan Johansson, who missed the last 8 games of the playoffs, He will be back to anchor that top line. Probably Kevin Fiala is going to get top line minutes. I'm anticipating, or certainly second line minutes. And Kevin Fiala is a guy who missed all but 4 playoff games last season. And he's going to obviously be on that line with Victor Arvidsson. Those are 2 big guys that are coming back to the lineup that they didn't have last year on their run to the playoff, the run to the Stanley Cup. So I feel like with them back in the lineup, I think that's kind of like getting two additions that are going to help, not only help you in the regular season, but if they can stay healthy. If you add those 2 players, say to a playoff run for the Nashville Predators, I think those 2 guys are really the reason why Nashville couldn't keep up with the Pittsburgh Penguins. If they're able to stay healthy and Nashville has a full team, they might be the ones wearing the ring this year. So let's kind of anticipate that happen. Fiala could end up seeing some third-line minutes. I do think he's going to see some second-line minutes and potentially some first-line minutes as well. So those guys are huge as far as returners to the Nashville Predators. And, of course, Nick Bonino comes over, 18 goals, 19 assists, 37 points. -5, but he played 80 games last year. He's going to give you a ton of minutes. He joins the Predators, bringing that ring over from the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's going to be their second-line center, and Scott Hartnell will get a chance on the wing or to be on their second line, or he's going to be a wing on their third line. So Hartnell comes over as well. Alexei Yemelin comes over from the Vegas Golden Knights to give Nashville even more defensive depth. And I think quite honestly, their opponent in the Stanley Cup final is going to be different this season, but I think they make it. And I like the infusion of not only the guys that have been there before, but the new blood and the new guys that, like Nick Bonino. Now he's got a ring, and maybe he's a little bit satisfied if he stays in Pittsburgh. But now he takes that ring over to Nashville and says, "Look, guys, you're relying on me to make sure that my game is always tip-top and 100%, and my belly doesn't get full because I have a ring already." I think those elements are kind of the seasoning that the Nashville Predators, along with their experience from last season, is what's going to really help them moving on into this season. And of course, it's September, so these are my thoughts today, but they can change in 2 months. But obviously, I'll be on SBR quite a bit, and you'll be the first ones to know. Okay, St. Louis Blues, 28-1. Now, remember, this was supposed to be the year that Mike Yeo was to take over for Ken Hitchcock, but the Blues kind of accelerated that process. They fired Hitchcock last year, allowing Yeo to take over with 32 games left. But since Yeo, the Wild played with just kind of this renewed interest, and I think that's going to carry over into this season as well. And it's not only a renewed interest; it was a renewed interest on defense, which was the key. The key to beating the Wild in the postseason, certainly with their lack of offense. Since the change, the Blues led the league in goals scored, goals allowed in a good way to the positive, and they also led the league in 5-on-5 save percentage. So I think their commitment to defense was noticeable after Yeo took over. He gave them a new start. He took over for the nagging Hitchcock. He's got some new blood with him behind the bench this season. Craig Berube is going to be added to the staff. He's going to be an assistant amongst other changes. So you have kind of turnover there, but I think it's good, and I think that Yeo's going to provide some stability. I think players are excited to go to camp and know what they did last year. It can be just built on. I don't think they're going to step backwards. I think they're going to make a lot of noise in the postseason. But I think Mike Yeo is probably the good fit there, much better than he was with the Minnesota Wild. Of course, scoring is an issue for them, and they finished 19th in scoring last year. Goals against was goals for was at 2.84. So they went out and traded for Braden Shen from the Philadelphia Flyers. Shen is, of course, a 25-goal scorer. He also brings a decent versatility with him. They can play all the forward positions. A tie for the league in power play goals with 17. Interesting enough, the player that he tied with was Alexander Ovechkin. So I think he's going to add some scoring depth to that second line. And I think that and that's going to be huge certainly with their lack of depth at center, which we'll touch on. Patrick Berglund, who had 23 goals last year, is not going to start the season. He's going to miss some time. He is going to lead a pretty underwhelming group up the middle. Paul Stastny is going to be the anchor of that first line, and Stastny's a nice player, but I don't know if he's your top line center. Even with Berglund, their lack of depth up the middle is a huge question mark. Without him, it's pretty much a gaping hole. And I think St. Louis is going to have to solve that problem to actually have success this upcoming season. And of course, we're talking about success in the realm of going deep into the playoffs. Of course, they'll make the playoffs and they'll win. I expect a couple rounds, but as far as future wagering is concerned, you certainly have to take a look at that. There's just too much improvement from other teams in the Central, and coupled with a lack of scoring depth for the St. Louis Blues, I just don't see them as a potential to put any kind of future money on. Finally, the Winnipeg Jets at 50-1. No one's going to deny that the Jets have a lot of firepower, and that's for sure. But their success this season is certainly going to weigh heavily on how Steve Mason performs. And of course, they acquired Steve Mason from the Philadelphia Flyers. Mason was 26-21 and 8 last season. Goals against high, 2.66. Save percentage low, 9.08. Connor Hellebuck is going to back him up. In fact, Hellebuck's win-loss record wasn't bad last year. He was 26-19, but again, the save percentage and goals against not where you want it. Mason still has to show, in my opinion, that he can take the reins and be the number one guy. Remember, in 2014, his record wasn't great. He was only a .500 goaltender in 2014, but the Flyers thought enough of him. His goals against was fantastic. Save percentage was fantastic. The Flyers thought enough of him to give him 107 starts and 109 total games over the next 2 seasons. That kind of push from the Flyers has not resulted in results. In fact, he's only 49-40 in those starts. I think Mason's presence doesn't give me enough confidence to back a playoff appearance from the Jets. Even with their ability to score, I just think I want to see more consistency out of the goaltending, but I'm certainly not sure that Mason or Hellebuck is the duo to do that. And if you don't have consistent goaltending, there's no way you can get penciled in as a playoff team, let alone the team to put a future wager on. So I'm anticipating that Paul Maurice's team is unfortunately going to miss the playoffs. And I really like Paul Maurice. I think he's a good coach. I like listening to him talk. I think he's very intelligent and good at what he does. But I think that this team probably needs another voice to get to the next level. Here's my predicted order of finish in the Central Division. We're going to go with the Nashville Predators going to win that division. Minnesota will finish in second. Chicago Blackhawks will finish in third. Those three get a playoff spot. Of course, the Dallas Stars will be in fourth. They'll get a wild card spot, with the Jets, Blues, and the Avalanche missing the playoffs. I'm Dana Lane for SBR Picks. We will be back with the Pacific Division preview as well as the write-up in the next couple days or so. Until then, hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you in a few.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our channel. Now, we've put a lot of work into producing all these free videos, so please help us out and keep all our content free for you forever by simply liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Now, not to mention, a visit to our industry-leading website will warm the hearts of all our SBR employees, especially myself. Now, the links are over there to the left, so do check those out. Thanks for watching.